Thank you. Thank you very much. Thanks very much. Happy Nowruz to everybody. I've always had a certain envy of the Iranian people in terms of New Year's, because having New Year's at the beginning of spring makes a lot more sense than having it on December 31st and January 1st. So it's a great pleasure to share this day with you, and to, if I may here, offer a hope and a prayer for the year ahead, that it is a year in which spring flowers of freedom blossom in Iran, and that this great nation, with such a proud and rich history and culture, is emancipated from the brutal dictatorship of the regime that currently sits in Tehran. With God's help, that can happen, and may I say that I also pray that next Nowruz we hold this gathering in a liberated Tehran, the capital of a free Iran. It can happen, and with our work together it will. But one thing that we have to celebrate is that, and it should give us hope about the larger struggle against the Iranian regime, is that the people who were incarcerated, there's no other word for it, at Camp Liberty have been liberated. And people said it wouldn't happen. People said it couldn't happen. And with a lot of effort by members of both parties, by leaders of the Iranian American community, by our friends in Albania, it did. So thank God for that. And let's thank Albania as well. It was a full year in which the Iran nuclear agreement was in effect. And it was a bad agreement. The International Atomic Energy Agency, not an agency of the United States government, but of the United Nations, in November found the second significant violation of the agreement by Iran, which was in the heavy water, that they exceeded the limit of 130 metric tons for heavy water. Sounds technical. It is serious and consequential. It's in reference to the missile tests that have occurred, violating UN Security Council Resolution 1929, passed in 2010, and Resolution 2231, as Mrs. Rajavi said, passed in 2015 when the Security Council endorsed the nuclear deal. We don't have to go back to November even. In recent days, the Iranian government's behavior in the Persian Gulf, harassing the USS Invincible, this is in the Straits of Hormuz on 2 occasions, is all part of the bad behavior of the Iranian regime. Those who were most vigorously urging us to endorse the P5+1 agreement, the so-called JCPOA with Iran, said that even though it wasn't a perfect agreement on its own terms, it held the hope of transforming Iran, of making it into a moderate, civilized regime. But honestly, what's happened in the last year? The reality is, not only has that not happened, but things have gotten worse. Human rights. According to the United Nations Human Rights Monitor, Iran is #1 in the world when it comes to executions of its own people per capita. Human Rights Watch, which is said that Tehran's mass execution of Sunnis in 2016 was, quote, a shameful low point in its human rights record. What about terrorism? Iran's terror at home is matched by its terror abroad, and its expansionist efforts in the region. In the summer of last year, during this last year that is ending soon, in Syria alone, there were almost 70,000 Iranian proxy forces. The Supreme Leader and the IRGC are not only aggressors, they are plunderers of the national wealth. They control at least 50% of Iran's GDP, that's its national economy. A very impressive document recently issued by the National Council of Resistance of Iran highlights this. 14 economic powerhouses, directly or indirectly controlled by the Supreme Leader, the IRGC, or their affiliates, with worth in the tens and tens of billions of dollars. And what's happening to a lot of that money? It's being spent to realize the extremist domestic and foreign policies of the regime in Tehran. Tehran is spending between $15 and $20 billion annually. Money really that belongs to the people of Iran. In Syria, to fund the war in Syria to protect Assad. The IRGC Quds Force commander Soleimani spends billions of dollars in Iraq to fund the Shia militias and instigate sectarian violence, the same Shia militias who were responsible for the death of hundreds of American soldiers who served in Iraq. So the bottom line is this. The regime in Tehran has not only not changed as a result of the Iran nuclear agreement, it's gotten, if anything, worse. And I think the rational conclusion from this record of facts, I'm not making any of this up, is that the regime will not change on its own. And in my opinion, therefore, the ultimate solution to this most serious threat is that we and our allies, working with the people of Iran, working with the National Council of Resistance and opposition groups in Iran, we must change the regime in Iran. That must be our goal. So Nowruz is a time of hope. It's a new beginning. Nowruz literally means, I am informed and taught, a new day. And in some ways, it is a new day here in Washington. And though I will say that I was a proud supporter of Secretary Clinton in the election last year, when it comes to the question of Iran, the change from President Obama to President Trump is an enormously significant and hopeful change. The Obama administration supported the bad agreement, didn't want to see violations of it, sent Secretary Kerry to encourage European bankers to go back and do business in Iran when they themselves didn't want to do it because they were burned by the sanctions before. The change in the White House attitude, it gives us an important opportunity. But I will tell people gathered here, many of whom are staff members for members of Congress, that the initiative and many of the most important things that can do to change the status quo in Iran must come from Capitol Hill. I think you'll find, and already have found, that the bipartisan consensus about the threat that Iran represents has returned. And there's a real interest in focusing in on the regime in Iran and changing what exists now. So what is our goal? Our goal, your goal, is not punitive. It's affirmative. We want, as Mrs. Rajavi has brilliantly portrayed in her 10-point plan, a better life for the people of Iran. I'm going to go over it very briefly. First, free and fair elections, where the ballot box is the only criterion for legitimacy of those elected. Second, a pluralistic political system with freedom of parties and assembly, respect for individual freedoms, freedom of expression, unconditional access to the internet. Fourth, separation of religion and state, the end of killing, really, of Sunnis, Christians, and Baha'i in Iran. Fifth, gender equality in political, social, and economic areas. Sixth, a restoration of the rule of law and justice, which is a proud Persian tradition. Seven, acceptance of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights and other similar international covenants and conventions. Eight, the recognition of the importance of private property, private investment, and a market economy as an engine of growth in a free Iran. And ninth, the support of a foreign policy of peaceful coexistence, international and regional cooperation, and respect for the United Nations Charter. And lastly, Ms. Rajavi has said on behalf of the Iranian people, a non-nuclear Iran, free of weapons of mass destruction. Now, that's a great program, and I myself think it bears a striking resemblance to the program of the American Revolution in the 18th century, of the French Revolution of the 19th century, of the wars against Nazism and fascism in the 20th century. So those were each fights that a lot of wise people, conventional thinkers, thought could never be won for the cause of freedom, but every one of them was won. And so at the dawn of Nowruz, a new day, I want to say to you here today that history stands not with the regime in Tehran, but with the people of Iran. And I want to say also, we must stand with them as Americans. It's our responsibility as Americans, because we are a nation founded on a creed, on a belief, the self-evident truth that every person is endowed not by the government, but by our Creator, by God, with the rights to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. The extremist regime in Tehran every day brutally denies that truth and horrifically keeps those rights from the people of Iran, and why we must help the people of Iran rid themselves of the tyrants that now rule them. Together, the people of America and the people of Iran, with the help of God, will restore freedom and true greatness to Iran, and may it happen in this year. Thank you very, very much.